I would say the single most important thing that governments could do would be, perhaps over a period of 5 or 6 years, to dramatically ramp up spending on scientific research and development. The reason I say that is that one of the most powerful feedback loops that operates in the economy is the process whereby new technology leads to more new technology, and that's the essence of economic growth. At present, spending on fundamental science is less than 1% of GDP. If major economies ramped that up to, let's say, 3 or 4% of GDP, not only would that give a large boost to growth in the medium term, because of the very long time lags that operate in the area of both developing and deploying new technology, we would find that the boost would persist over a period of maybe 30 years, which would have the effect of solving many of our other problems as well. I think the economy has been through a period where one kind of positive feedback was threatening. Essentially the kind of positive feedback where falls in activity lead to further falls in activity, and the economy is dragged inexorably towards collapse. To prevent that, there was no option but to accumulate large amounts of public debt to support aggregate demand. But now that we're through that stress period, a different kind of positive feedback is threatening, whereby for heavily indebted countries, withdrawals of funds from the country lead to a widening of the yield spread on their bonds, which leads to further withdrawals because it's a stress indicator, which leads to further widening, which leads to further withdrawals. To prevent that from happening, it is now the time to begin reducing deficits. I think we have to be cautious against radicalism. If Britain, for example, today swung from an 11.6% deficit to a surplus, the hit to aggregate demand would be enormous, and we would be into a depression. So what's needed is gradual deficit reduction rather than radical swings towards surplus. And that usually is enough to send a signal to financial markets that the country is serious about reducing its deficits, and will therefore prevent the kind of death spiral that I described. In the long term, the challenge that Western economies are facing is that their populations are aging. Given that debt burdens are high already, deficit spending cannot be used to finance pensions. That would quickly lead to an insupportable debt burden. And forecasts, which are obviously unrealistic because the system would break down long before they got to this point, have suggested that that could lead to debt burdens of as much as 400% of GDP. The ways out of that, I believe, are twofold. On the pension side, we either have to lengthen our working life to keep pace with increases in life expectancy, or we have to accept much higher taxes to finance pensions. We cannot debt finance them. That is on the debt side. On the economic growth side, which is the other way of keeping the ratio of debt to GDP under control, I think the feedback argument has quite a lot to say. In that, as I mentioned earlier, new technology is the ultimate driver of growth. So if governments had the vision to increase spending on basic science from its current relatively meagre level to something substantial, I believe that we might find that kicking growth up to very high levels. It might easily make 4 or 5% per annum growth, such as we had in the 50s and 60s, possible again. If that happened, the accumulating pension liability wouldn't look quite so bad.